crew, what's good? Welcome to another episode of the Crew Book Club podcast. It's your girl Sade, ready and set to go for today's episode. Listen, we are going to have an amazing time getting into this book, and it's a good one. We're talking about the gap. We're entering to stage 3 of the purpose map in our Believe in Bigger book. And we're going to talk about some blessing blockers in the book. And so I can't wait to get into that. And I hope you're feeling good, feeling great. And if you are not, that's okay. Just keep moving forward. And trust me, it's light at the end of the tunnel. I've been having an amazing week. There has been a lot going on. This week, my biggest fight and feat was perfectionism, which is so funny. We get into that in the Gon Check Me Boo segment. And so I like to reflect when I'm getting into a stage where I could tell something is happening mentally. I'm like, okay, what was I doing when this happened? Was I overthinking something? Am I doing too much? Am I talking to myself nice? Where is this coming from? And then I have to go back and be like, oh, wait a minute. Did I talk to God today? And so a lot of times when we pick up business and we get super busy, we can easily be like, okay, I'm going to write in my journal. Maybe not this morning, but I'm going to write when I go to lunch, when I make time for lunch. And then time for lunch comes and you're trying to eat and do other things. And so this week I had to go back and say, what did my father tell me to do? Don't focus on anything else but what he told me to do. And I've been tapping into some new opportunities, and I told myself I would not run from them. Previously, the past year or so, I probably had 3 people reach out to help them start a podcast, and they were like, it was put on my heart to start with you, and I said no. And this time around, I was just like, I'm not going to block anything and miss the opportunity of what God is putting in my lap. It makes me think, somebody said, well, if God didn't tell you to do it, don't do it. I'm like, well, I didn't give him a chance to answer. I answered for myself so fast instead of just saying, give me a moment and let me pray about it. And coming full circle, I'm helping people write outlines. And I was like, oh my goodness, if I would have just started then, I can only imagine where I would be now. I might not be so in my head, because writing for my part, doing an outline for me is easy, but doing an outline for someone else to bring the work alive in their own voice and trying to keep it exciting, but where the question can lead them to have a conversation, it's a whole different learning experience. And yeah, so I think I got in one of the first outline, it kind of flowed with a topic that I'm used to talking about, mental health. And to write about mental health to me comes so easier because the last few years, that's all I've been reading. That's all I've been studying. I've been going to therapy myself, which I got back into this week. And so I didn't get a response on something that I had completed. And I got in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, they didn't like it. It was the worst. Oh, I dropped a ball. They had so much feedback. They're never going to work with me again. Like, my mind just kept going down this rabbit hole. And I was like, hold up, take a pause. God told me to do this. I've learned to talk to him and to lead the way. And he put this opportunity in my lap with no interview, no questions asked, just do it. Here's the due date, send it over. And I did that. And the first time around, it was like, I love it. It was da-da-da-da. Then the second time, it was just like, oh, wait, this, that, no, don't like that, da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, I was just like, oh my God, I'm doing everything I can to be perfect. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're not always going to get it right. And I know that I did the best that I could do with everything, and I gave it all of my heart, and that's it. you know? So this week, the perfectionism creeped in, and I know it creeped in because I was trying something new, and I thought that I had cured it in a way, but you don't know when something is cured until a new way of it being used come at you. You know what I'm saying? Because I got over the perfectionism of this podcast, of my own personal podcast, but working on someone else's, woo, that's a whole nother different perfection that I'm addressing. And so thank you for the kind words from my friends who know how big of a deal personally know how big of a deal this opportunity was to work on such a major outline of a show. And I'm just extremely grateful. And I'm so happy that I'm exploring this journey with you guys. And I'm being very careful because I don't think I'm supposed to say anything about who or what I did the outline for. So I just want to protect myself in that way. But I just wanted to share with my crew, like, when we have felt like we've overcame a particular thing, whether it's doubt, self-doubt, some of the stuff we talk about being blessing blockers, indecisions, or comparison, you think you've accomplished it, but it's in there somewhere, and something can trigger it to arise, but you just have to know how to let it go, move forward, and press on. You get what I'm saying? So that's a little bit of what's been happening on in my week. Oh, you're probably like, oh, I didn't go over therapy. Girl, the reason why I'm back in therapy is because I could feel the energy between my husband and I going kind of left. And I was just like, hold up now, we don't work too hard. Let's go back to therapy, have some relationship maintenance, like an oil change. We ain't got to be in therapy every day, but I want to talk to the therapist about some things that's been kind of red flagging our past interactions and our communication. And so it was so funny because we discussed something that we were experiencing, and we got into an understanding. We expressed ourselves, we acknowledged ourselves well after the fact, after I already booked the appointment. But I still went to the appointment, and it's just he couldn't get on, or something had happened with work and he couldn't get on. And then 15 minutes before the session was over, he was like blowing me up trying to get onto the call. And then I realized right before I even got on the call, I said this session was probably just meant for me because I needed to vent, get it out, get perspective, and be recharged on how to communicate with him. And it was just a great experience. So shout out to the therapist who helped me with that. So yeah, it's been an eventful week. So getting into it, this does get into the show where it's Who Gon Check Me Boo. God is, where I give you a scripture each week on a scripture that checks me in my own life. And remember, we love a good check because we deserve a good check. And if anybody's going to check us, God is. Okay? Now, this comes from the Devotional Journal, Believing Bigger by Marshawn Evans. And I turned to day 54, and it was Indecisions. And we're going to get into this in the book as well. And that is a blessing blocker, she labels it. And the scripture was Ecclesiastes 11:4. It says, if you wait for perfect conditions, you will never get anything done. So, and one of the things that I literally underlined and circled was, it's subtle but toxic form of perfectionism that pollutes our ability to use the mind that God gave us. We overthink, overpray, and over-research our way out of a blessed opportunity. And we over-question, trying to discern whether something is God's will. God desires that we become leapers instead of watchers. And we don't have to look for confirmation in every possible avenue. That's fear and not faith. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was waiting for certain confirmations and feedback, and it wasn't meant for me. I had to have faith that God put me in position to do this, and I'm going to succeed no matter what because of his will and his desires. And that's that. And if I don't get contracted again, that's okay. I served the purpose that it was supposed to serve, and now I'm moving forward. And the question that was prompted in the day 54 indecisions was, how does fear tend to show up as indecisions in your life? And back in 2022, I wrote, the act of perfectionism tends to show up in overthinking. And I've come to realize that that's just fear creeping in. So when I start to overthink, overanalyze, over-research, over-question myself and what God has already told me, it's my fear. I realized it's my fear trying to take over. And I rebuked that real quick. Fear, don't play with me. All right? But the prayer was, Lord, give me an undivided heart. Guide me in a way that I should go with boldness, decisiveness, and surrender. I guess when I was first, I've read this before, but when I read it again, I was like, you want me to be decisive? And it's not that you're being decisive about a good opportunity. It's deciding what you should do and should not do. So you should be decisive in times where you need to be. Someone ever told you, oh, she's so indecisive? Like, yeah, there's a level of decisiveness that can keep you to miss the opportunity, but you still need decisiveness to make the appropriate decision. So you're not too quick to say yes, and you're not too quick to say no like I did. And I'm happy and blessed that God represented an opportunity for me to do it. And in such a big way. Okay? So that was the Who Gon Check Me Boo day 54 of 100 Days Believing Bigger Devotional Journal by Marshawn Evans Daniels. And you can get this journal in the link in the show notes. And the scripture was Ecclesiastes 11:4. If you wait for perfect conditions, you will never get anything done. Okay? Now, let's get into the book. Yes, Believing Bigger, Discover the Path of Life Purpose by Marshawn Evans Daniels. This book has been great. I hope you're enjoying it just as much as I did and currently am. If that's the right play on words. And currently is. I don't know, y'all. My mind is so clusterfudge that I can barely think straight doing this right now. Okay, so we're starting in chapter 8, stage 3, the gap. And it's embracing in between. The quote that starts off the chapter is, the big mission inside of you is seeking expression. When God calls you to something that is not on your radar, embrace it. Let me tell you, the opportunity that I just had really wasn't on my radar. I literally spoke about it with someone like July 3rd, and literally 4 days later, the opportunity presented itself. And this goes to show closed mouths don't get fed. And also, it's a God thing, because I didn't have to interview. I didn't have to prove anything. It was just like, here you go. Can you do it? Are you available? Bam, bam, bam. And I was just like, oh my God, this is a God thing. Okay. This is where the gift shows up. Remember we talked about in the previous episode about talents and gifts. It was the one right before this, episode 84, Uncover Your Talent. So there's a talent to things, but then there's the gift. And the talent, you can teach yourself to be good at it. It can come a little natural. It can come more natural to others. But the gift, that's when it flows. You don't have to work hard at it. It just comes to you, and it doesn't feel like work. You know what I'm saying? So tapping more into the gap, if we go to page 124, it says, God must be trying to get your attention. And now you find yourself in a peculiar place, a wilderness and a place of transition, a place in between where you've been and who who you're called to be. That place is probably extremely uncomfortable because you're no longer in control. Welcome to the stage 3 of the purpose map. We welcome to the gap. Whew. I remember the uncomfortability of being pushed out to be a full-time entrepreneur. I remember the being uncomfortable when I first decided to get on this microphone. And now to be writing outlines, being a research producer, like that, those, it's like there's different levels to the things that we experience. And then there's opportunities that come that we just should not avoid. Okay. And it's God's point to make you uncomfortable, because that's how he's going to build your character, to show you that you can endure all things, especially when it's with him. And I think when she goes into the quote that says, God won't bless where you're no longer belong. Like, if you're feeling like God not blessing this, God not doing this, maybe there's a possibility that you need to move. And I ain't talking about like leave someone all the time or leave a job. Maybe it's how you see the situation so you can be guided into the right things, if that makes sense. Okay. So she says on page 126, now there's different ways to fall into the gap. Okay. She says sometimes we choose to enter the gap. Desire leads us to do something new and different. And sometimes we get frustrated into it. Now, I would rather choose to enter into the gap and take the leap than to be frustrated into it. I do not like the feeling of frustration, the stress. I'm like, no, God, let me just be obedient because you told me to do it. I'm going to just choose to just do it right now, instead of God putting you in such a frustrating situation where you're forced to change and not welcome the change. Okay? And he can do those things with still caring and loving for you. And I know that kind of touches on last week when we talked about being forced to go to church. If you listen to the whole episode from the clip off of Instagram, you will understand, even though I was forced to do it, exposed me to God. Even though it did not feel good, I left church, and then I chose to rediscover him on my own because I saw the path that was happening, and I didn't want to continue on that path. All right. Now, she also says on page 127, the gap, it means you have outgrown your comfort zone. You may have been very successful there, but we're not interested in a mere success. We want a life soaked in significance. Okay? We know a lot of people who make a lot of money doing things that they don't care about. I don't want to do things that my God does not care about. Okay? I don't care if a bag attached to it or not. If God told me to do it, it's going to be significant, and he's going to provide, and he's going to take care of me. And plenty of times this has happened. I remember one of my biggest gap moments were when my husband and I first got married. We were very young, and probably like 3 years within our marriage, he decided he wanted to leave. And we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I couldn't afford it by myself. And he left, and I remember that's when I got my first ever eviction notice. And I walked into the house, and I boo-hoo cried. I've never experienced that before in my life. And I was freaking out. So next day, I went and asked my manager, who gave me $200. And thank you so much. You know who you are. And he didn't even question about paying it back, which that was a blessing, even though I had wanted to. And then I remember like a few months later, I decided that I was like, okay, let's get the new apartment, the 1-bedroom I can't afford. Who cares what other people think? Let's let's just focus on God. And I was blowing my husband up, trying to get back with him and seeing what was going on. And then it's crazy because a few weeks later, I found out that he was talking to someone, like with someone. Like, she spoke to my sister-in-law. She met the boys. I was just like, oh my God, this is really happening. Like, I'm getting a divorce. And this is the first divorce. And it freaked me out. But in that moment, I was just like, okay. I think I did that for like 2 months. And then 1 month, I was just like, you know what? Cool. I'm going to just focus on God. And that's when I remember getting so close to Christ. Like, I rediscovered after my college experience with tithing, which I talked about in last week's episode, to this was being another significant area, because looking back on that, after I did like 40 days, and rewind a little bit, the moment that I decided to focus on me and my relationship with Christ and stop calling him and trying to get back with him, that's the moment that I got a promotion to go from a lead customer service rep to an assistant manager of a shop. I was able to get my own place without no longer needing his assistance at the time, because I used to be like, hey, I need this. Even though he would come through, it still hurt, because it was just like, here you go, I'm out. Then I remember I was going to Bible study every Wednesday. Lord, you going through something. You're going to be in church Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever you can. You're going to be up in there. You're going to go to both service on Sunday. But I was really like pulling my life together. The job I got was in Daytona. And then I remember him calling me and saying, hey, congratulations. I was like, okay, thank you. I can do this without you, boo. And I just focused on God. And then it's not like I didn't want my husband back. I was just like, I just came to the acceptance, like, if this is God's plan, this is God's plan. I wasn't going out trying to meet a dude and lay up with somebody else to get over him. No, I just solely focused on God. And then I said, you know what, God, I want my husband back. So I decided to stay faithful. I decided to go. It was one point I was drinking like 3-4 coffees a day, Dr. Pepper, crazy. And I said, I'm going to go 40 days and 40 nights without milk, coffee, soda. I'm going to just drink water. I had ate food, but my liquid. So I did that. Literally the 39th day, he called and he was like, can we please go to dinner? And I think what it was, February, the time that was happening, his birthday, I didn't call him on his birthday to say happy birthday. I was like, no, I'm moving on. He started to become out of sight, not out of my mind, but just out of sight. Just time heals all wounds. And I remember him calling my job and was like, you didn't call me on my birthday. I was like, you gone. I'm moving forward. And I think in that moment, that's when it kind of clicked in, like, oh, snap. Like, she gonna be done with me? But no, like, that, but on top of me being obedient to God, by the end of literally the 39th day, he called me. We went to dinner on the 40th day. On the 40th, and he did not know what I was doing, the fast. And I remember God telling me, when you meet with him, just listen. And I sat there and I listened. I didn't ask why. I didn't go into detail of who she was. I did none of that. I just let him talk, and I asked God to let me see him. And then I went into the bathroom. It was at a Red Lobster. I went into the bathroom and I prayed. And I said, okay, God, do you want me to take him back? What do you want me to do? And because I was spending so much time with him, and we had already been communicating, God was just like, yes, take your husband back. And I took him back. And it wasn't easy. And it was something we had to both heal from. We didn't go to therapy because at the time therapy wasn't a thing for us. And we just decided to move forward. But in that moment, after we got back together, I realized that the gap wasn't about him. The gap was about me. The gap was about the fact that I was not going to church for a while because I was trying to spend time with him, be around him, see what he doing, keep him occupied. So I hope he wouldn't do anything else. I kind of fed into surrounding my life around, revolving my life around him. And God is a jealous God. And I think God had to have that happen for me to focus back on God. And that was one of the biggest gaps that I can remember in transition. But during that gap, I succeeded so much. I saw what I could do on my, not on my own, but in my own, in the sense of not having him, and what God, and when I connected to God, what God can do. And it made me realize it was definitely only a God thing. And God needed us to be broken apart so he can build me as an individual and focus on him and not just my husband. So I feel like that was one of my biggest gaps. And I'm pretty sure, I look at it like, I feel like we have gaps throughout any situation. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're a gap. A gap in a situation is not the end. It's just pulling you out of that comfort zone, and so you can utilize your faith. And it's all about getting close to God anyway. If you ever feel like something is tugging you and something is moving you around, really pay attention to that feeling. So anywho, that was one of the biggest gaps, and I felt like that gap was necessary. So the gap is necessary. You're not going to get to the next level without the gap. Point blank, period. All right. Now, that was chapter 8, stage 3, gap, embracing the in-between. Because the moment that you embrace the in-between, that's when God is like, okay, cool, I can do my thing. Embrace the in-between so God can do his thing. Ooh, okay, title. All right, let's get into chapter 9, making the shift. In the beginning of chapter 9, the quote is, chapter 9, making the shift. It says, God calls us to shift us. The interruptions is the invitation. So what happened in that gap invited me back. It made me accept the invitation that God had waited for me. He needed to shift me. And after my husband left out, like I said, it took me about 3 months to go with God's shift. Because God's going to be shifted whether you like it or not. Now, whether you in that current and you flowing with him in the shift instead of fighting a current, and you going to drown if you fight the current. And that's what was happening. But the moment that I started to go with the flow of Christ, that's when things started to change. And I wanted to get into talking about the part of the book where she talks about blocking your shift. But before I get into that, I want you to understand what the shift does. God does this by stripping us down, realigning us, and preparing us to cross over the other side. We need to empty out before we can elevate and accelerate. You won't exit the gap until the shift happens in your thinking. Many never emerge from the gap stage because we don't want to give up the familiar. Imagine if I would have, how could I have gotten the assistant position if I did not accept where I was and move forward when I was going through that with my husband the first time? Probably not. Not at that moment. I probably would have got it months later. I could have delayed my blessings if I didn't decide to join the shift. Okay? And so I had to let go of what I was familiar with to get out of the gap. Okay? Now, I love, which I touched on this in the Who Gon Check Me Boo, is the blessing blockers. So there are blessing blockers when you're making the shift. 7 of them she had was self-doubt, isolation, comparison, indecision, facts, hoarding, and distraction. The 2 I want to focus on that connected with me while reading was indecision and hoarding. Indecisions was on page 159. And she says, when you're faced with a choice, it's easy to find yourself facing paralysis. We overthink, overpray, and over-research our way out of the opportunities, and we over-question trying to discern if something is God's will. We become watchers instead of leapers. Oh, Jesus. This is so true because, like I said, like so often I was wanting to go after something, but I felt like I over-researched. For example, real estate. Y'all, my first deal took me 9 months. You know why? Because I was overthinking, I was over-researching, and I wasn't leaping. The moment that I decided to leap, the first real estate transaction was a listing. Had no clue, had no camera. No, I had to borrow a camera that my husband had brought. Well, I know you probably said, "What's your husband?" Well, no, him and his friend had brought the camera together. And I had to use the camera that I had. I couldn't afford a photographer at the time. I had to take my own pictures. I had to buy the lockbox with some money, with an item I had to pawn to even make my first real estate deal happen. It was a hot mess. It was in the middle of nowhere on like 3-4 acres of land with a mobile home. That was an hour and a half away from me, but I was just determined and I was going to get this. But imagine the deals that I could have closed if I would have just got out of my own head and wasn't overly indecisive about what I needed to do. And what I learned is you're not going to know everything. You're not. You're going to have to leap and you're going to have to try and learn as you grow. The same as with these opportunities to be a research producer on podcasts. I had no idea that was what I would be doing at all when I first got into this business. I was focused on being the talent, being signed to a network, let alone becoming a research producer. Like, what? Come on now. God always thinks bigger than what we see or what we think. So it's like, go deeper, and the what you think is deep is God has something way bigger. Okay, so the indecision one definitely was something that I used to struggle with, and I'm just focused on yes, I want discernment and indecisiveness to happen when I'm getting a clearance from Christ, but I don't want it to affect me where I miss the opportunity. Now, hoarding, it talks about hoarding on page 161, and it says it can be any places, prize, protocol, or people we cling to and find refuge or significance in. We can even hoard unforgiveness, regret. Hoarding is just another way we hold on to the old ways of thinking, living, and finding significance. I had to let go of the idea that everything needs to be perfect before I make a move. You know, that is something that I had to learn how to stop doing, to stop worrying about everything being perfect. This podcast, before I launched, the logo didn't have to be perfect. I had to change the logo. My relationship, I had to understand that no marriage is perfect, and I needed to water my own darn grass. I've made the mistakes of trying to do things in our marriage and be a person that I'm not, to satisfy, to not set boundaries, to just shut up and listen type of thing, because that's kind of what it's like being what was it to be a submissive wife, to let him just do everything and not question it. No, that is for God to confirm in me. If God gave my husband a plan, he gonna tell me too. It's gonna confirm. It's not gonna make me feel uncomfortable. It's not gonna allow me to be manipulated. And I had to let go. I'm like, is this what marriage is supposed to be like? No, in certain aspects. But I also had to let go of the fact that nothing is going to be perfect. And either I could push through and start all over, or I can push through, Or I can start all over and then 10 years down the line be at the same space. So it's like, I'd rather push through with a situation, figure it out, learn from it, and to let it go when it needs to be let go. And so, yeah, it's like, but I do come with hoarding. And I think sometimes as people, we want to possess something so much and not really understand that I can't possess nothing without God. And that's just point blank, period. Okay. So when it comes to hoarding, can you think of something, a relationship or a situation, a belief or behavior, even something physical God is leading you to let go of? I had to let go of perfectionism. That's one of the things I have to constantly remind myself to let go of. So I don't know what your let go is, but my let go is perfectionism. All right. Now, that was chapter 9. And I want to stay in chapter 9, but I want to go into chapter 9 with the challenge of the week. But before we get into that, I want to also thank you, BetterHelp, for being so prompt when I was trying to book. I couldn't find my old therapist, so I had to try a new person. But thank you for the prompt response, the quick find on the therapist. I literally requested in the middle of the day, and then the next day I had paired with a therapist. And then once I scheduled, we were ready to go. And that's why they are the partners of this episode. And you can get a special offer from the Crew Book Club podcast listeners. Get 10% off your first month of personal therapy. They have scholarships as well if you need financial assistance. But that's betterhelp.com/crewlove. Okay, so that link will be in the show notes as well. Now, the challenge of the week, y'all. The challenge of the week is get out of the gap. And she gives us some steps on how to get out the gap. Step 1 is get a bigger vision. Step 2 is let go of the past. And step 3 is speak what you seek. And step 4 is invest in it. I want to focus on the invest in it. You can always tell what somebody is invested in, how they spend their money, how they spend their time. And there's 2 different ways I looked at how I invested. And I challenged myself when I hired a coach, when I paid to take a course on launching a podcast, but most importantly, when I paid my tithes first. Off rip. Check, hit account, do the math. Here you go, God. And sometimes it's not even do the math. It's like, okay, God, what do you want me to give? That part. That's what I want to invest my money in. The time. I want to invest my time into Christ. All right? Because I know if I invest that time, I'm going to get the results that I need. Because he's the orchestrator, right? And so you can pick either one. And even when you look at these things, don't always make them a financial. Let's go deeper than finances. Because even rich people get rich and they still have issues. So I want you to go deeper, not just connect all of this to a financial game. Get a bigger vision. Could be how to be a better wife, how to be a better sister. If your vision is about you only, then your vision is too small. Okay? Letting go of the past. Like she said, we can't get out of the gap until we acknowledge and let go. All right? Speak what you seek. Okay? Speak on it. Say these things will happen. I am certain. I am committed. Like, speak on that and do that thing. All right? Invest in it. Your time and your money. And your efforts. All right. So what would the crew do? You can email the crewbookclub@gmail.com, or you can DM. What would the crew do? You can DM the Crew Book Club and ask your questions. I didn't get any questions this week, so that's okay. So if you would please email or drop a DM and ask a question so I can answer it right here on the podcast. And the quote of the week. Yes, the quote of the week comes from page 162 of Believe Bigger by Marshawn Evans Daniels. And it says, the opportunity can be a distraction disguised as a destiny. So make sure you're looking at every opportunity and having the decisiveness to choose the one you should do and the one you should not do. May God bless you. May God keep you. And thanks for tuning in into the Crew Book Club podcast. Hey!